Hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, How to Engage with Geographically Dispersed Employees. My name is Lucinda Broad, and I'm the Community Manager for the Employee Engagement Working Group here at 2 Degrees, and I'll be your host for this webinar. I'm very pleased to introduce you today to Trewin Restorick of Global Action Plan, who'll be presenting. Now, just a few technical points before we get going. We're going to have a Q&A session after the presentation, and you can submit a question to me at any point during the session by typing into the Q&A box, which you'll find on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, and pressing send. And if you have any problems with the technology or the audio during the presentation, please use the chat box on the right-hand side to send me a message. From the drop-down menu, just select to send the message to the host, and I'll get back to you. I'm now going to hand over to Trewin for the first part of today's session. Over to you, Trewin.
Thank you very much indeed, and welcome everybody. Couple of apologies to start with. Even though we're in the middle of London, there's a school right next to us, which is the most dreadful music teacher in the world. So if you hear strange noises from behind me, that's the music instruction. And the second is that what I'm going to talk about is the experience that we've had on engaging employees globally with three fairly significant companies. One was a fast-moving consumer group, one was a financial services organisation, and the other one was an energy company. But it is very much a sort of the start of a process for us. So what I'm going to cover in the presentation is the things that we've learned and what's happened to date. But I'm sort of by no means proclaiming that we have all the answers or are an expert on this issue. But I thought it would be useful just to provoke discussion if I highlight the things that I've seen. So that's what I'm going to try and do in the next sort of 15, 20 minutes or so, and take you through the slides I've got. The first slide, I apologise if any of you have seen this before, but it is my standard stock slide about the whole issue of employee engagement. And here we have a fitness gym in the US and two guys resolutely using the elevator to get to the gymnasium. And I think all I wanted to illustrate by that is that the behaviour change at any level is incredibly complicated, that people are not rational human beings in their decision-making at all time. We're sort of led by habits and the pressures that we face and sort of the world around us. So behaviour change campaigns have to be fairly sophisticated to reach through to employees, and that becomes even more so when you're talking to a diverse global audience. So sophistication in the campaigns is obviously crucially essential. And the second thing we've seen in all the companies we've worked with is that there has been a statement by somebody very senior within the company about the importance of sustainability, and usually very bold and challenging targets have been set. So, I mean, you get, for example, Paul Pullman at CEO with their Sustainable Living Plan making incredibly bold statements about the ambitions that the company has, and closer to home, Justin King, the CEO of Sainsbury's, and their 20 by 20 plan is also incredibly ambitious. So that's a commonality in the businesses that we've seen, is that somebody at the top of the business has made a strong statement around sustainability, and the challenge for the CSR teams is to how to give that traction at a global market with employees who are usually doing highly diverse things in countries with very differing cultures. And I think one of the things that we've seen in all the companies we've worked with is that challenge has usually been passed down to the CSR team, which occasionally can be quite distant from all the parts of the business, and sort of can struggle sometimes to understand the real drivers and all the different sort of global areas or territories in which the business is operating in. So, with a couple of the companies we work with, we found that the CSR team had a very distinct view about how the project should be run and developed. But actually, when we got down and started talking to people like factory managers in India or Russia or different countries, the ambitions of the CSR team really didn't chime with what was happening in those particular countries. Or the business was already doing lots of things already, but weren't necessarily calling it sustainability. It could be sort of efficiency savings or other things. And there was sort of confusion about where the CSR and sustainability campaign fitted with these other efficiency drives. So my next slide is actually, it's not a global company, it's actually Bart's National Health Trust. But I think it's a good indication of how we've started to work with organisations, because trying to work in a hospital or 4 different hospitals, which is a very complex setting, has some of the same characteristics of a sort of a global audience. And I just wanted to quickly run through this slide and the steps that we took with the Bart's employees to sort of get them truly engaged in the project, because I think there are themes that are important at a global issue. And the first thing we did, as you can see, the two sort of mustardy dots on the left, is we spent a lot of time talking to employees about what are the drivers of their existing behaviour, what was important in their worlds, and what things were likely to help them create change. And in the other businesses we work with internationally, not having those focus groups and getting that understanding on a global issue sort of caused difficulties later on. Having got that understanding, the impact hierarchy was we then selected behaviours, and we only selected 3 behaviours, and I'll explain what those were in a bit later, which would work globally. And the behaviours we wanted to choose were behaviours that were relevant and accessible to all staff and would have a significant impact. So that again, I think we've seen a lot of global campaigns where the sustainability message has been translated down to employees in quite a broad way, and we found that doesn't necessarily work. The audits were to basically discover what was happening around those behaviours in the first instance, and then we ran a series of campaigns, and I'll go on to those in a bit more depth about actually engaging staff, following up with a further audit at the end of the process, and then feedback and reward. So I think if we were running a global campaign again with a different company, we would very much want to follow this hierarchy, which would overcome some of the challenges that we've had in some of the businesses we work with. I think once you've got your model of action, the next thing that we found really important is, and everybody knows Plan A, but the reason I've put the slide up here is because it's a really compelling story, and it's about a journey, and there are points on the journey, and then there's feedback and sort of messaging back about how well they're doing, where they're not doing so well, engagement with a lot of stakeholders. And I think having that theme of a journey or a narrative, so that it's not one set of targets that you hit, but it's actually something that you're trying to achieve, and being honest about, okay, we're quite a long way away from it here, but we're doing really well here, is incredibly beneficial. And I think, some of the other campaigns you're seeing at the moment, like Unilever Sustainable Living Planet, also have that sort of journey type feel to it. So we think that's very important in terms of these sort of campaigns. And obviously the messaging has to be positive, realising that there are still very many contentious issues around sustainability, around sort of climate change. There's still, particularly in sort of Europe and the US, still a lot of contention around it. So the messaging we're trying to use is about all the other positive things that come from a more sustainable way of operating. So I think those are the first things we found, is really plan the campaign, create a story, and then pick three or four or a limited number of simple actions. And this has worked for us increasingly well. This is an example of the project we've been running with Bart's and GE and Skanska, where we ran a campaign called TLC, and it was simply turn off equipment, lights out, and close doors. And when we went back to the sustainability team and said, this is the campaign we're going to run, they were really shocked, because they had a very sophisticated and elaborate sustainability strategy, and what they saw was it being translated down into some really stark and simple messages. But the reason we chose those is that they're non-contentious. They very much link to patient well-being, which is obviously core to the hospital, because if you turn off the lights and you close doors, actually patients sleep better. So all the people within the hospital, like the clinicians, understood why it was important, and you could measure it. And I think one of the campaigns we've just run with one of the global companies, we've done exactly the same. We've taken really, really simple messaging that works across all their territories, and the feedback we've had from that approach has been very positive. Next slide or next two slides are slightly odd, but this is a sort of choir, obviously, because how do you get the message out into those communities? We do think that using champions is the right way to go, and the analogy with a choir is that whenever you sort of have a choir, when the music starts, you usually get one or two people singing very loudly and usually off key, and then the others join in, and you need those first few people to start singing to make a campaign work. But what we've discovered in the organisations we work with is actually you have to go and handpick those champions. So, they might be the factory manager, they might be a particularly influential person who seems to know everybody. Just picking the champions through sort of volunteering and letting them come to you means that you occasionally get the usual suspects, and they can be people who don't have enough resonance within the business to get the messages and the changes that you want to see across. So really going out and carefully selecting those champions in the first instance, we think is very important. And the next slide, I said the next two are a bit strange, but this is a fireman, and that's an example of why that's important. So this is actually in the UK, where an energy company was going around to households trying to encourage them to use energy more efficiently, and people were dubious about why the energy company was doing it. But when the fireman went around and did it and talked about the benefits in terms of sort of the savings in the house, people were much more receptive to the message. So finding the right messengers, we think, is incredibly important. And then once you've got your messengers, so you've got your simple campaigns, nothing can beat really visual and interactive ways of getting the message across. So I've got some really quick examples of this. This is in the UK. This is Investec, where they wanted to cut paper, and they created their Investec paper tower in their lovely atrium, which was a real stark demonstration to employees about the impact of all their daily behaviours. This was a campaign with E.ON, where they created a Carbon Saints and Sinners campaign with golden balloons as the saints and the red ones as the sinners. And what they did was they tied those balloons to different equipment that had been left on or switched off, and gradually tried to get that message across. And when we did this campaign internationally with a bank, we got loads of fantastic pictures back from all over the world, from different companies, different countries, where employees had used the balloon messaging as a really sort of simple way to try and get a message about turning machines off across to their staff. This is another example where human works. This is slightly different, but this is with the National Trust, where they discovered that if you urinate or pee on your compost, it speeds up the whole composting process. And again, they were like trying to raise the issue of food waste in a comical way, so they had their gardeners in this picture. And this is MTV, and again, a really simple way of getting a message across, which is about employees. We provided them with green lollipops. When they ate lollipops, their tongues went green, and they were basically, whenever anybody did anything positive, they were given a lollipop, and they then had permission to go and stick their tongue out at somebody else and challenge them. And again, it might seem trite, but what it is based on really important sort of shifting of the social norms, so that habits and routines that you want to see, you can really encourage just by using different forms of engagement, and these forms of communication that work at whatever level and whichever country you're at, and within most cultures. I think once you've done all those things, again, what we've seen is being crucial is getting people to demonstrate and share their actions. So this was one of the companies we've worked with, where they provided lots of feedback to us about what they'd done, but they did it through not only surveys and sort of measurement, but by sending in photos, reinforcing the fact that there are certain habits that they wanted to see, and the company is now bringing all of those things together and will be using it as part of their global communication to demonstrate the different activities, and the fact that lots of people doing small and simple things are really important. And linked to that, I think, is the whole celebration and reward and making sure there's an ongoing story. So one of the things that we've been lucky to have is endorsement from the United Nations. And what we found is that linking a whole series of global activities to an event, so for example, World Environment Day, and then celebrating that to show that lots of people doing small things globally is having an impact and is important to the business. And if you can get business leaders there to hand out certificates and to give that reward, that's really important. And one of the things we have discovered is that you'll be sometimes surprised who the employees want to receive the rewards from. So we had an example in India where the United Nations certificate absolutely meant nothing to some of the people in the factory, but what they wanted was the reward from their factory manager, because that's the person that was most important to them in their working environment. But having that reward system is crucially important. And the other thing we found is that it takes a long time to get these campaigns to stick. And so you might think, well, the first year, well, the results are a little bit disappointing or not quite what we really want. But what if you can keep it going and build and build and build and gradually add more and more actions, then you will create that momentum, particularly if you're able to put it in the narrative of a broader story and sort of demonstrate that it's an ongoing initiative which is going to stick within the business. So that is our learning and our understanding of some of the challenges that businesses are facing in terms of sort of these sort of campaigns. I hope that was a useful dash through what we've discovered today. We have some agreements with the company, so I can't give their names out, but I'm very happy to answer the questions that you may have on the things that we've discovered in running the initiatives to date. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Trewin. Okay, so we're moving on to the Q&A session now. And as I mentioned earlier, if you'd like to submit a question, just go to the Q&A box on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, type your message and press send, and then we'll address those over the next few minutes. Okay, so our first question is, how do you measure engagement, and what are the best ways of doing that?
So I think I'll go back to... Well, I'll give two examples. One is I'll give an example of something where I think it's worked really well, which is actually the BARTS project, and one example where it was actually easy of what we had to do because of the complexity of the scale of the project we were running. In terms of the BARTS initiative, what we did when we did the planning and that sort of initial sort of focus groups was to get a real understanding about what was important to the organisation, and obviously what was important to the organisation most of all was making sure that patients had a sort of a reasonable experience in hospital and were given the best possible healthcare and were able to move out of the hospital as quickly as they possibly could. So what we did there was we deliberately measured that right from the start, because that was what would make the behaviour change program work for the hospital. So we looked at sleeping patterns and the amount of disruption that patients were facing because of lights being left on and doors open. So we measured that, but then the audits also went around and did spot checks of what was happening within the hospital, and we measured the financial impact. So we had a whole wealth of data, which we then measured again at the end of the process, which was 6 months within this particular hospital. And what we found was that patients were sleeping better, and financially the hospital was able to save £100,000, and there were changes in behaviour which were measurable. So that's what we could do with 4 hospitals, and we measure that right from the start. One of the other companies we worked with, which was on a much, much larger scale, what we wanted to do was to do the same sort of things. We wanted to be able to measure the environmental and financial savings, and we wanted to be able to measure sort of the difference that the activities were making on the company's core business. But in reality, because it was such a broad reach, that was not possible. So what we ended up doing was getting the specific actions that we ask employees to take and measuring those. And then what we asked them to do was to send us stories and pictures and anecdotes of those activities. So all the measurement we got from that project at the end of the process was this number of employees have done this number of actions in these areas, and here's a range of photos and a range of stories that give that some validity. Now, hopefully, as the project evolves and becomes more embedded within the business, we can start to add a degree of sophistication. But that at this stage, that in the first instant was what we measured.
Great, thanks, Trewin. Okay, so moving on to our next question. You mentioned Paul Polman and Justin King, who are clearly very engaged on sustainability, but how can you get senior managers and the board on board when they don't see the value of sustainability?
Yeah, that's a $1 million question, isn't it? I think, it was interesting. Sorry, I keep harping back to the Bart's project, but there were some interesting things we discovered in that project. And one of the things we discovered was that is linking the behaviour change initiative through to the core business requirements. So that they knew that they had an issue around disruptive sleep patterns, and they knew that the only way to deal with that was through a behaviour change process. So we got much more traction within the organisation by providing a demonstrable link between the behaviours that we were seeking to influence and the benefits to the organisation. So if you went to Bart's and said, what did this project do, their sort of hierarchy of things would be, well, patients' well-being was improved, it saved us £100,000, and it had an environmental impact. Whereas we, as an environmental charity, would have gone in and said the hierarchy was for the environment, and then money, and then perhaps patient care. So we had to completely reverse our expectations, but we knew by running the project there would be environmental impact. But in terms of the clinicians and other people on the scheme, it wasn't about that. It was about patient well-being.
Sure. And just a question kind of related to that. Do you have any tips for engaging the real skeptics and the people who are too busy to engage?
Well, I think that the skeptics issue, I think we addressed right at the start by picking activities that are really common sense, no-brainers, and very hard to argue against. So I think in all the campaigns we've run, we've really steered clear of sort of the whole climate change debate and the areas where we know that there's a lot of contention. And what we've done is we've stuck to those simple activities that are relevant to people and they can make a direct connection to. So, for example, one of the companies we work with has a massively elaborate and brilliantly articulated sustainability strategy, but when it actually came down to it, some of the factories they worked in, it was simply about turning the taps off, and that was because of the water issues in the country, and many of the other issues that was addressed in the sustainability strategy simply were not of relevance to that community. So again, it was a bit of a shock back to the sustainability team and saying, well, actually, this is about turning taps off, this campaign. And it's almost being brave enough to run really, really, really simple common sense messages that, you think, well, everybody should be doing that as part of the behaviour change campaign, which actually gives you the credibility and the space to go on and do things. In terms of people being too busy, I think, the rule is, I think there's going to be a very small percentage of enthusiasts and champions and leaders who really get into it. Then you'll probably have the vast majority who will go along with it if they think it's the right thing to do and if they think it's what the business is aiming to achieve. And then you'll always have a small group who are too busy or not interested or sceptical or sort of not involved at all. And I would say, well, just accept they're there and don't spend a lot of time, effort and resource trying to engage them unless they're in a really crucial part of the business, which is blocking decisions, because, you can spend a lot of time banging your head against that particular brick wall.
Good advice. Thanks, Trewin. Okay, we've got time for just a couple more questions, so if you do have a question, get it in quick. Our next question is around green champions. So in our experience with green champions, people seem very enthusiastic to begin with, but this soon wears off. So how would you suggest that we maintain momentum?
Yeah, we've seen that time and time again. And I think our recommendation would be right at the start is to give them very, very clear expectations about their time involvement and give them a sort of a route away if they want to take it. So when we run campaigns, we say it's for this specific period of time. This is what we hope you will do during that period of time, and this will be the point where there will be a celebration and an event where you'll be able to sort of end your involvement if you wish, or you can then get re-engaged. So activities like World Environment Day are really, really useful because you can either launch campaigns from that point and then have an off date where you have a celebration, or you can run campaigns up to World Environment Day and then use World Environment Day as your celebration point. But I think with champions, the two things that we often see go wrong is, one, it's an open-ended commitment, and you're often asking people to do stuff voluntarily and above their day job, and you can't expect people to do that for very long. They simply burn out. And the other thing that we've seen is that there's no clear scope about what you hope the environment champions will do. So champions can sometimes be asked to do lots of things, or will want to do lots of things which actually are outside of their remit or the business has tried before, and you have to start saying no to them, and that builds demotivation as well.
Okay, great. And one final question, kind of related to World Environment Day and specific sustainability weeks or months or days that businesses might hold. Would you say these are definitely a good idea, or does it give people the impression that they don't have to bother for the rest of the year?
Well, I think that comes back to the whole sort of narrative and story. So if you're saying this is and I think Sainsbury's and Marks and Spencer's do this well. If you say that this is part of a longer thing that we're involved in, and there will be landmark activities which are part of that process, then people really understand it. And I think they are a good thing because they basically give a sense of urgency and a connection and around an event which that you tend not to have around sustainability because it can be a bit nebulous and there's sort of no point of action.
Sure. Okay, well, it looks like we're out of time, so I'll bring this session to a close. Thanks so much, Trewin, for that presentation. I thought that was really interesting. And we've made a recording of the session, which I'll be posting up on 2 Degrees probably in the next couple of days. So I'll email that to everyone as soon as that's up. And if you think of any other questions afterwards, maybe after watching the recording again, do contact me or Trewin directly, and we'll get back to you. So thanks again for joining, and enjoy the rest of your day. I hope to see you on another webinar soon. Thanks a lot, everyone. Bye.